everyone. My name is Jesse Chason with Lisa Blanchard as the host of Airing Addiction.
I share often my journey started on this campus. Got sober as a client here, just like you.
I really do see phenomenal change.
Always hope. I've seen situations that on the surface look impossible become possible.
Doing this podcast is to share those recovery stories, be honest about what the challenges are and have some real conversations, but kind of share that out on the airwaves.
Welcome everybody to today's episode of Airing Addiction. If you're watching this live on Facebook or listening to it closely when it gets posted on a podcast, it's April. It's kind of rainy, but spring is here. It's a great time for new beginnings. And I'm really excited about this episode because a previous podcast, guest Daryl Buchanan actually recommended that we have this individual on our podcast ASAP. Said his story is really powerful. And when Daryl Buchanan talks, I listen. So that is what we are doing today. So I will let Jesse introduce our guest today, but I'm really excited for today's episode.
Thanks, Lisa. Good morning, everybody. If you're listening live on Facebook, I'm really excited as well. It's a beautiful thing in recovery to have a network of people, both professionally and personally, that, really we're unlike any other network, in terms of the camaraderie, the fellowship. And yes, I second what Lisa just said about, Daryl Buchanan being one of those special people. Right before we hit record on this or we went live, he actually just texted me. So perfect timing, right? All things lead together. So without further ado, I want to introduce our guest here and invite him to start sharing. Rob Demeo is in long-term recovery, and currently his role is the community outreach coordinator at Sunrise Detox, Evolve Recovery, and the Counseling Center. Good morning, Rob.
Good morning, guys. How are you?
Doing well.
Super grateful to be here. Thank you, guys. Daryl's amazing. Doing his show was an eye opener. It was fantastic. All the work that he's doing in the community. We need more people like Daryl. So I'm wicked grateful to be here.
Awesome. So like we were saying, we usually just start this out with feeling free to share whatever you would like about your lived experience, about your experience as the community outreach coordinator, whatever you would like, and then we'll just kick this back and forth in a conversational style.
All right, absolutely. So my name is Rob. I'm a grateful recovering addict. I grew up in Somerville, right outside of Boston. I came from a single family household with a mom who did everything she could to keep food on the table. And I had an alcoholic, abusive father when I was young who used to beat the bag out of me when I was a kid. My mom did everything in her power to get me away from that situation, and she successfully did. As a single mom, she didn't have, too many eyes on me as a kid. So around the age of, 6, 7, 8 years old, there was a neighbor who used to like to touch me in my pants when I was a kid, and kind of put me in a position where if I told my mother, it would have brought a lot of negative consequences to the situation. So being, fatherless, the man of the house, I felt like I needed to keep that secret to myself. And what happened was keeping that secret, I never really fit in with the kids that were my age, that were doing the things a kid my age should have been doing. So I gravitated towards an older crowd, and feeling different from everybody else and being able to feel like I fit in with this older crowd. That older crowd was doing things a kid my age should never have been doing: smoking pot, drinking, doing coke, doing ecstasy. So at a very young age, I took that first one. And what that first one did, it was a sip of alcohol. It took me and it put me on this emotional roller coaster where I didn't have to feel the things that I felt inside. I finally was free of having to feel different from everybody else. I had more courage and confidence, and I was able at a young age to, relate and identify with kids I had no business hanging out with. And I took that and ran with it for a long time. Gravitating towards an older crowd. When I was in my teenage years, I got involved with a girl who was significantly older than me, and had my first kid before I was 18 years old. I came up in Somerville at the end of the OxyContin era. Opiates were a thing, but, for me, I never got that opiate bite. I was more of a cocaine, ecstasy, angel dust, alcohol, party it up, get outside myself. Nothing wrong with what I'm doing. At some point, that girl told me that if I wanted to be a father to that little boy, that I needed to stop partying and doing the things that I was doing. This was back when Massachusetts was different. There was a stigma towards addiction, and nobody really was talking about detox, aftercare, NA, AA, smart recovery, refuge recovery. There was no resources like that back then. So it was just don't do drugs and live your life. And unfortunately, what I saw that when I put down the drinks and the drugs at that point in time in my life, those addict behaviors still were there. I was still self-seeking, egotistical, and self-centered. Things didn't work out in that relationship. It was a nasty custody battle. At some point in 2010, I was driving to my mom's house. Now, my mom was my biggest supporter, my biggest cheerleader. She was amazing. She was this Irish Catholic woman from Somerville who took in the whole neighborhood, right? She would cook for everybody. She had kids that weren't her kids. They all had special names for her. It was an amazing upbringing coming from that, Irish Catholic, Somerville type of environment. Me and a girl I was seeing, we were on our way to go to my mother's house for dinner one day, and this was in 2010. Drunk driver swerved into me. I swerved away. My truck flipped over, went 3 lanes across the highway. At that point, that car accident took my left hand, 12 to 15 reconstructive surgeries. But the prescription pills that doctor was writing that day or throughout that time, those prescription pills took my life. And that's when, my body really started to, really love the opiates. And it was interesting because it wasn't straight addiction right off the bat. It was a medication that was given to me to handle, 12 reconstructive surgeries. There was the medications that were given to me to help me. I was literally attached to myself. They had to open up my groin and attach my hand into my groin and sew me together. And I had to stay that way for 8 weeks in order for the arteries to regrow themselves in my hand. And I stayed that way. I stayed taking my medication as prescribed. Things started to get a little bit better. And I'll never forget the day that I was in a tattoo parlor getting a tattoo on my chest, and I couldn't sit through the tattoo. Obviously, you can see that's not really a problem for me, but this particular tattoo, really brought a lot of pain. And the girl that I was seeing just asked me if I took my medication that day because I was squirming and I was squeezing. I just was sweating. And I looked at her and I said, "What does that have to do with anything?" And she says, "You're probably dope sick. You should probably go take your medication." And that was the first time that I kind of realized that my body was chemically dependent upon this medication, that in order for me to get out of bed and handle certain things and do extracurricular activities that I enjoyed, really anything, I needed to have that oxycodone in my system. And then from there, I was fully aware that I had to take my medication, and I stayed on top of it. But at some point, that doctor did what all doctors do. They looked at me and said, "Hey, Mr. Demeo, you're all done. I can't prescribe this medication to you. This is your last script. You have to taper yourself off." I looked at him and said, "What the hell's a taper?" I went home, I sniffed the whole script of oxycodone, and I was left, with that gut-wrenching feeling of being dope sick the next day. Made a couple phone calls and went straight to IV heroin use in the back of a Burger King parking lot in Malden. And from there, I was off and running. Fully addicted, shooting dope, ripping and running through the streets of Boston. My disease of addiction took me to the darkest edges of the city of Boston. It was really intense, where my disease took me and the things that I was doing. It wasn't anything that the person that my mom raised me to be would be doing or ever thought that I would be doing. And it's funny because there was nothing my mom did or didn't do that made me make the choices that I made in life. And I say that because that's really important, I feel, for every mother or father of an addict, and over the years of what I've been doing for a living. But nonetheless, I ripped and ran all through the streets of Boston, homelessness, penniless, jobless. The people who I was, hanging out with and around were not the best people to be around. At one point, I reached out because I knew what direction my life was taking. I was just so bad at beaten and broken. The disease took everything from me. Being addicted to heroin took everything from me. It took the kids, it took the house, it took the cars, and I was left with nothing. It got so bad. I can't even explain how bad it got. All the doors would, closed, all the locks were changed. No one was picking up my phone calls. I was completely and utterly alone. My best friend, my cheerleader, my mom, she showed me some tough love. She told me, I'm not going to support this after years of bringing her, through the mud, that she ended up actually selling her place and moving down to Florida and cutting me off completely, which I think was a big step to me actually wanting to change my life. There was really no resources. And this was back in a time when there really wasn't many people out there showing what, recovery can do for someone's life. The only one I knew that was doing that was Matt Gannell. He's a good friend of mine. And I had reached out to Matt back then and kind of told him, really what was going on. And he placed me in my first detox, which was Demeo Detox in Roxbury. Out of all places, that was the first place I had to go and get introduced to substance use treatment. And it was Demeo. And I loved Demeo, but it was a rough place to be. I didn't make it long in that detox before I was out the door. I did the in and outs of treatment, getting kicked out for every reason. Nothing clicked. Nothing would work. I'd meet that girl. Me and that girl would go on a run. She'd realize I was dead weight. I'd be back into the detox, right? The runs started getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and they started ending up the same way, handcuffs and overdoses. I could be out of a detox at this point 3 days before yet again I'm in an emergency room being Narcaned or I'm in the back of a cruiser. It was just, I started to realize the trajectory of, where my life was going. And, this was not just Demeo. I was there 15 times. I was at Spectrum. I was at High Points. I was at the, I did them all, right? And I'll never forget going back to Demeo that last time. The run had gotten so bad that I had crawled to that detox. And I walked in and, they were always grateful to see me because that's one of the coolest things for me. And I think I had to take, 40, 50, detox or treatment admissions before I kind of got that, bigger picture because, there was always the people that were in the detoxes, the recovery specialists, the clinicians, the directors that got to know you on a first name basis, right? And, as you go in and you spend this little bit of time with them, they planted these little mustard seeds in your head. And, some of them really hit home for me. And I remember that last crawl to Demeo and, it all kind of made sense, right? I was battered, beaten, and broken. I remember being in room 8 of that detox, the old Demeo detox, on my knees praying for everything that I have today. Only because all of those people who struggle with addiction or struggle with a loved one in addiction sat me down and planted those mustard seeds to a point where on this last and final admission, a bigger picture was painted and I kind of knew my goal and kind of knew where I needed to go. That was the last time I was in detox. That was in 2015. At that point, the case manager, who was my case manager 100 times, I'll never forget, Poncho Brown sat me down and said, listen, we've got a 6-month residential program at the bottom of the hill called the John Flowers Recovery Home. And if you want to bet, I got you. I was unsure. I went back and forth with it. This further treatment, it wasn't something that was being talked about back then. It really wasn't, detox, aftercare, further treatment, halfway house, TSS, CSS, PHP, IOP. None of those words existed back then. It was like, do you want to go down here and get your life together or don't you, kid? And I chose to go. And I was completely out of my element, right? I'm in the middle of Roxbury, tattooed white kid. I was exactly where I needed to be, right? And I was around nobody that I'd gotten high with. I was around a whole different culture of individuals. I was learning things that I would never have learned before, being introduced to different ways of life and different philosophies that, like, where I come from, I would never have been introduced. And a lot of them I still incorporate in my life today, right? And that halfway house saved my life, man. It was, 6 months of therapeutic community. Like, if I didn't get out of bed, I got fined. You know what I mean? Like, I had to wear a shirt and tie to group on Tuesday nights. Like, I started to relearn everything my brain was taught in Actions of Addiction, like how to get up and wash my ass, how to brush my teeth, things like that stuff, like core survival things that, like, we forget about when we're ripping and running on the streets. Like, I had to relearn how to do that, right? And, like, it's embarrassing sitting here, like, talking all these years later, like, I didn't know how to brush my teeth, right? Like, it's crazy to me, but that's what I did. And I focused on that. And slowly, after years of, like, focusing on, like, the change, the results, right? For years, I'd focused on the results. I want my kids back. I'm going to get clean to get my kids back. I'm going to get clean to have a relationship with my mother. I'd focus on those results, and I never really focused on the change. But for the first time back in 2015, I really started to focus on the change. And the weirdest thing happened, all those results I wanted started to come back into my life. And it was intense at first, right? Because now here I am on my way to a job interview, right? It was Boston Harbor Cruises as a deckhand running around the harbor doing tours for all the tourists. It was crazy. And then all of a sudden the season ended. Now I'm stocking shelves at Walgreens. And then all of a sudden I got a call for an advertising and marketing company, and like things progressed in the right direction. And it was absolutely amazing. At some point it was time to graduate that halfway house, and I moved into sober living, right? I did the program the way it was laid out, moved into sober living, and a buddy of mine, and I decided that, we no longer want to, really pay this woman, for our stay. So we decided we are going to open our own, and we did. I was able to, own and operate a sober living home up in Lynn, Massachusetts for quite a bit of years. Actually got a second one, was able to manage and operate that one too successfully. No longer involved. That wears on you after a while. But like at the same time, as I'm doing this with this house and, whatnot, the Demeo Detox offered me a job as a recovery specialist to kind of help people just like me stay in their beds, right? They started to see the success rate started to go down, and they wanted to implement more people in recovery, more people to plant those mustard seeds, more people to sit there and try to fight for somebody to stay in their bed and save their own life, right? So I took that job, and, then I started doing the aftercare, and I started building relationships with all other treatment centers that I had been a frequent flyer in, and really just kind of got to show a lot of people that, like, if I can do this, they can too. And it kind of took off for me. Wicked grateful that was my process, right? My recovery, I got my car back, got a license back, my first year of recovery, I did what you're not supposed to do. I met a girl. We had a baby, right? So I've got this 6-year-old girl now. She's my whole world. Her mom is like my best friend, right? Even though like we're not together, she's my best friend. Like it's amazing what recovery has given to me as far as like, not just like all the material things, but like the perception and the principles to be able to maintain healthy relationships in my life, especially co-parenting. So like I got this little girl, I'm a father in recovery. It's my first year. Like it was just unreal feelings. I navigated it pretty well in my opinion. And at some point, I started working in treatment. I built a network across the country with a lot of people, a lot of powerful people doing some amazing things. And I jumped on with a partial hospital. Well, let me tell you this, that, recovery was blessed. It was great. I gravitated towards, back then, it was like an outreach type of environment where there was some serious community leaders, with their tables, speaking up. Pat Cronin, all these guys, Kevin Rosario, they're out there talking about it. So I followed in those footsteps. I started speaking out and talking about kind of where I come from, where I'm at now. And community outreach has always been a huge part of my story, because, the fellowship meetings can be difficult. They can be intimidating. But, being out there with a group of men that are, come from where I come from, and it's not as it's not in the basement. It was just a different environment. It's an activity. I'm out there having fun. It was what I gravitated towards. And back then it was different because it was just the start of the recovery revolution, I like to call it, back then. And things started to change. Politicians and people started listening to us. People started making some changes. Organizations started to really take a stronger look at kind of some of the problems we had in our treatment system and, how we treated addicts back then. And I've seen a lot of change over the past, 8-9 years. And it's been a blessing to be a part of that and to walk beside some of the strong individuals that I've walked beside doing the same mission that I'm on, right? And recovery was great. Like it seemed like it was all cupcakes and rainbows, but I learned really, really quickly that it wasn't. My mom was living in Florida, and on Friday the 13th in April 13th, Friday the 13th, I got a call from my cousin, who's a family priest, and I knew not to pick up the phone, but the person I was with that night said, you got to pick up the phone. It was 9:30 at night, and they talk about reservations and being ready. When I picked up that phone, my cousin told me that my mother had died. And here's my cheerleader, my absolute rock, my everything, had died. But what I wasn't prepared for was what he was going to tell me after that, is that her boyfriend of 15 years killed her. So, it was his birthday, April 13th of 2018. He decided on his birthday he was going to pick up his drug of choice, which was alcohol, and he was going to drink himself into a stupor. My mom had gotten up on his birthday at about 7 o'clock and had gone to work. She worked for a retirement home. And at 12 o'clock, she was going to come home and take her break. She worked with her best friend at that point. They had the same schedule. My mom went home for her break at 12 o'clock. And what it appears to be is she found him drunk. She had had enough. And, the most dangerous part of a domestic violence, relationship is when someone decides to leave, right? And I think what she did was tell him she was done and that he had to leave. And what he did was he picked up a barbell in the carport of her home and he went in on my mother's head to the point where it was about 15 times and she was unrecognizable. He put her under a blanket in the carport of his house and he took off. My mom's best friend came home from, she knew she didn't return from her break. So she had come to check on my mom to see why she wasn't back from her break time. And she found my mom with her head caved in under the blanket and, blood everywhere, whole crime scene. She alerted the police in Bradenton, Florida very quickly. When the police came, they asked her where to find him. And she said the only place he would be is at the 2 local bars around the corner. The police picked him up in a local bar around the corner from the house with my mom's brain matter embedded in his pants and her blood on his hands. And he was brought in, and from there started a 15-month capital murder trial and investigation. So I don't know about you guys being, afraid of the unknown as a recovering addict in recovery, trying to hold on to principles, trying not to fall into reservations, but a 15-month murder trial, get your brain, the hamster wheel spinning. There's so much emotion. I didn't know which way was up. I had to reach out for all sorts of help, trauma therapy being one. Spiritual healing being 2. There was just so many resources. But what I can tell you is that before my own flesh and blood stepped up, the recovery community in Massachusetts did. That was my rock. I got a surrogate like Mother Maureen Kavanaugh who swooped in and made sure I was okay. She's my mama bear. She even to this day, she's got me on a tight leash. And it's people like that really stepped in, Matt Gannum, all of the recovery community as a whole. I don't think I would have been able to put services on if it wasn't for the recovery community, families I've worked with that gave back in a time of need that I'm so absolutely grateful for. And like anyone, like, of course, I wanted to go out and get high. I did everything wrong in my life because, like, for what I've understood is that the drugs and the alcohol are just a symptom of something more messed up, and that's me. And any way that I can act out on character defect, whether it's women, whether it's a casino, whether it's shopping, whether it's, whatever takes me outside of me to fill that void inside is what I'm going to take and I'm going to run with. And I was doing that. And there was a lot of people on my team that, put me in my place, Maureen, quite a bit. And, they got me through it, right? Like I walked through the storm and I came out on the other side. And one of the biggest things I think that had happened is that I got back in June, right after that April, there's a domestic violence walk, right? You walk in a heal-a-thon, which means, men put on high heels and walk a mile in the high heels to raise awareness against domestic violence. And this amazing, just unreal individual, Laverne Gordon from the Love Life Now Foundation, reached out to me that June and said, listen, I'm having this event. It's already in place, but I want to change the whole event and walk in your mother's name. So, shortly after my mother's murder, this negative is now flipped into a positive. We're talking about it. We're speaking up about it. We're breaking the stigma about it. And here I am, walking in high heels through the streets of Brockton while, 40 or 50 people are carrying my mother's, picture. And just really people are beeping and we're raising awareness and we're doing what we need to do to, really bring, awareness to domestic violence. And, as horrible as it was, as terrible as the situation, got with my mom, we were able to really help a lot of people. And, it's just an amazing feeling. And my relationship with, Love Life Now Foundation has, taken off. I'm involved in all of their events. I'm constantly raising awareness for DV. What I started to see is that there's a lot of crossover, right? When I was in the courtroom with Barrick facing my mom's killer, which was hard enough to do, addressing the court, Barrick at one point said I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't drunk. And that kind of hit me heavy because I'm really no different than Barrick, right? It's just one bad decision away before I eat a bunch of benzos and can end up in a jail cell, not knowing what the hell I did, and, I felt bad at a point, that the disease had gotten them that bad. And I started to realize that there's a lot of men out there, abusing alcohol, hurting women. There's a lot of women out there self-medicating because of the trauma and the abuse that they're going through. So I started to see, a lot of, gaps that needed to be bridged between domestic violence and substance use treatment. And I've been doing everything in my power to kind of, bring my mom's story to light, talk about all the good parts of her, and, help as many people as I possibly can, and, facilitate those resources that I meet, and get to know, through my wide travels here in my recovery journey. And it's been a blessing. A lot of people have gotten help. My mom was the type of person who could love me when I couldn't love myself, could see through me and love me because of all of my demons. And she did the same thing with that man, and eventually that's what, killed her, unfortunately. I started with Sunrise Detox in 2000. I don't know, it's been 4 years, right? And I've always worked with Sunrise Detox. I was with co-occurring PHP down in Fort Lauderdale. My phone rings, from all over the country, especially with the DV stuff. And people needed some help. And Sunrise kind of was the detox that I kind of always used, because their care to the patients was far beyond anything that I was getting from my patients anywhere else. The staff and the integrity and the dignity that they showed my own, patients was just beyond exceptional. And everybody had a great experience. And at some point, I was at the grand opening at Sunrise here in Millbury, Massachusetts. And, unfortunately, the place that I was working for ended up having to close their doors because the woman that owned it was sick. And, Sunrise offered me a job, and I, kind of took it, and I haven't left. And I got to, grow with the facility in Millbury, personally, professionally, and watch the facility grow. We have an amazing executive director, Courtney Carpenter, that runs, all of our programs on our campus. Our service coordinator, Tom Harrington, is fantastic. He's, direct care for all of the patients that come through the door. And, we operate in 5 states with 10 detoxes and a bunch of outpatient programs in these different states. So I travel a lot and kind of get to see, what addiction looks like in different parts of the country. And every time, like I said, I just come back from, New Jersey yesterday. Every time I come back to Massachusetts, I'm so grateful for all those individuals who led that recovery revolution to make the changes in our state to allow us to operate all of these beds, whether it's, Medicaid, Medicare, private, all of these beds that we have. We often don't realize how lucky we are in the state of Massachusetts to be this flagship for our loved ones, our daughters, our brothers, our sisters, to be able to get this treatment when they need it. And that these words and this talk and these podcasts aren't being, looked upon as negative anymore. And they're being embraced because, so many of us don't realize that, everybody knows somebody who knows somebody that's struggling. And like, this disease doesn't discriminate. I have a client base of really famous people to, really poor people. And like, it just doesn't matter. And being able to service all populations now in Millbury, because we have, gone in network with a lot of stuff and taking some mass health, like I'm able to really help on a greater scale than I was before. And it's just been super exciting. So, I mean, I don't know if that helps, but that's what I got.
I don't even know where to start. I will just comment on what you just said. And I think but then I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm sure Jesse does too. Oh, yeah. Daryl was right. I mean, powerful story, right? I don't even have a lot of words, right? Because you said them all. But I just want to comment, because I think, we just talked about kind of that ability to support all, and that's like just so tied to kind of my own personal kind of philosophy on addiction treatment, right? Spectrum is over 50 years old, and we've been doing, a lot of, predominantly Medicaid work, like DMIC, right, for many years. And we have the New England Recovery Center to support those with self-pay or commercial, and that we really believe that treatment should look as similar to each other, regardless of where you are, because often those that are in the publicly funded programs, are no different. They're just further down this path with less resources at this point, right? And it really does touch everyone. And, it shouldn't look really different. It shouldn't be, this magical process for somebody of means and be, not a wonderful environment for somebody not. And there's lots of financial logistical reasons that make it not a perfect system. But I just wanted to comment how much I appreciated that. But I definitely see several themes, right? The clinician in me can't help but notice the significant theme. And thank you so much for your vulnerability, Rob. I don't even, the childhood trauma that you experienced, the ongoing traumas that you've experienced, and that connection to addiction is one of my passions to educate the world on, really, and how those adverse childhood experiences really do lead to all of these negative outcomes, particularly substance use, because and it just makes sense, right? If somebody tells you all of the things that they've been through, the only reaction is, of course you used substances, right? Of course you started drinking, of course you started doing this. And there's just so much that strikes me. And one of the things thank you so much for sharing your whole story about your mom. What really struck me before I knew the really tragic, end to that story with your mom was every time you talked about her, you light up.
Yeah.
You definitely light up. And one of the things you said really struck me because you said, things that, and we do, we could talk about Maureen Cavanaugh all day. We've had her on the podcast twice.
Oh, yeah.
We run fast meetings every Wednesday. She's fantastic, but you reached out, in your conversation to parents, to mothers, fathers, like, you don't have to own this, right? It's nothing that you did that created this. And what I want to comment on is just listening to you talk and listening to you talk about your mom and how she is that what she gave you is all that you are showing now, right? Like there's so much of that comes through, that unwavering support for individuals, the ability for you to show compassion to your mother's boyfriend because of his disease. With the most horrible thing. I mean, I can't, that's just unbelievable to me. And I just think it's real. I had so many things to say. And then you said that, and it's like, all right, I have to talk about that. That is really, amazing and unbelievable and not easy. Right. And, so I'll let Jesse jump in too, so I don't talk for the rest of the time, but, thank you so much, Rob, for sharing all of that.
Yeah. Just to piggyback off what you just said, Lisa, thank you, Rob. Certainly there's a lot of similarities there. We can talk offline, and this won't be our last chat for sure, about some things that in our past and our current that are similar. And it just struck me right away that, Daryl was on here a little while ago, and he shared from the heart, and you did as well. And that's a great skill that not everybody gets the privilege to have for a variety of reasons. In recovery, I feel like, just in my experience, that it's easier than some because, you go to meetings and you hear things like religion is for people that are scared to go to hell, and spirituality is for people who've been there. Right. So, whatever hellish situations of which, you touched on today, that's not your everyday walking around life today. And you clearly have a mission and a passion to educate and to help people in that same similar hellish situation get out of that. And that's something that I too am eternally grateful for as somebody with lived experience in recovery, and that there are so many resources and so many, the people you mentioned, the Pat Crones of the world and Maureen, of course, that we have people out here that are doing this, because unfortunately I know people in other states that it's just not that way, even present day. And, we need more people to get out there, what you're doing, and to educate and to just be a beacon of hope and light for the recovery community. So thank you.
I appreciate it. I live with a powerful disease that lives between my ears and talks to me in my own voice, constantly telling me I'm a piece of shit. Don't talk about that. Don't talk about someone touching you when you were a kid. Don't talk about your mother's murder. Like, in order for me to continue like my recovery and continue to be free of that, like, I have to speak up. I have to talk about it, because at the end of the day, when you leave me alone in a room by myself, you're leaving me with the last person who tried to fucking kill me, my mom. But like, and that's just the truth, right? And if I don't raise my hand, if I don't talk about it, if I don't bring light to it, I'm only as sick as my secrets, like they say in the fellowship, right? And like, I have to talk about I have to bring them to light. And like, I can't tell you how many times once I talk about it, somebody surely follows. Somebody else comes, says me too, right? That movement, right? Yeah, me too. And like it gives somebody else hope to be able to, not listen to that, disease that talks to you in your own voice and tells you to stay quiet, tells you to stay sick, which potentially leads to, implosion, self-destruction, right? And like there's a sense of gratitude that I walk around with on a daily basis because I'm not supposed to be here, and like at the end of the day, take the titles, take the position, take all of the material things away. Like I'm just not supposed to be here. So I'm just having a good time, being my authentic self and just trying to, help whoever I can, increase the quality of life, right? And like I tell everybody, like it starts when they have the idea or the thought that they want to increase their quality of life. That's when it begins, when they have the idea, like I can't keep living this way. I need to reach out for help for whatever that is, right? People are recovering from stuff that I'm never going to have to recover from, eating disorders and, broken family systems and, all kinds of stuff, right? And like at the end of the day, it's just who's gonna like who do you reach out to? Who do you ask for help from? And if like someone relates to what I'm saying, I don't have any advice to give anybody. I really don't. I'm a heroin addict from Somerville who can talk about shit nobody else can. All I got is my own experience, and that's all I bring to the table, and that's all I'm trying to do. And when we talk about these other states and whether or not a wealthier population versus an unwealthier population. I mean, sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes I knew I got more out of treatment not being wealthy than I do when I, have money. So to see the amount of beds that we have compared to like the state of Florida or to the states that are even New Hampshire is catching up with the times, but they're still behind us when it comes to certain things. To see where we are, to see where some of these parent education groups have come with what's that no wrong door policies and all these different things that have been advocated for and have changed because a group of people got sick of seeing what they were seeing happen to their loved ones, so they've advocated for change and things change. That gives me hope that if we can continue to advocate for change, things are going to change. And it's just been a beautiful, like just from where we were over the past 8 years to where we are now, it's just fantastic. And I know this treatment industry is getting a little bit different. The landscape looks much different than it did 10 years ago, but there are genuine people out there really wanting to help, and we can't take away from that in any way, shape, or form. And it's amazing.
The other thing I wanted to touch on, which is important to me too, and a lot of ties to some of the work that we do more broadly at Spectrum, is that connection between addiction and domestic violence. We also, in addition to all of our, substance use treatment programming, we have a long history of running batterers intervention groups, and really kind of, supporting victims, but also kind of really looking to intervene, right, with individuals that are in that situation. And the way that you spoke so passionately about kind of how connected those things are, and that they're likely also, just like addiction, rooted in their own cycles of abuse, right, and their own cycles of negative experiences. And I think that, sometimes these things are treated really separately. And I think there's a real opportunity, to talk about how do we bring those systems together, right, to talk more about the impact of substances and domestic violence, and the impact of domestic violence and substances, to really connect those together.
I mean, once we start connecting it, we're opening ourselves up to human trafficking and so many other things and so many other realms of all of this that all play a part in the same spectrum of what's going on, right? It's just the correlation between all of it is just, from what I've seen, is just unreal. And you got to start somewhere, right? And you got to kind of, there are dots to connect. And it comes down to, I can't tell you how many domestic violence events that I go to that, I'm the drug guy. I'm the only one who knows anything about rehab. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But there's more people reaching out about rehab than they happen to know. So it's, it's the prevention and the education, and it really is, it's everything,
Yeah, we should talk more.
Definitely. And I'm thinking just broadly, I'm sure you've heard and probably say hurt people. And recently I heard heal people. and being on both sides of that myself, and it sounds like you as well, that, we're no longer part of the problem today, we're part of the solution. And however that looks like, right, with this unique connection that you found through trauma and some of the worst lived experiences that you had shared about mom, and my sincere condolences, Rob, that, quickly turned into, here's a walk in your mother's name, right? Here's this door, this invite into a world that, who knows if one person in there needed to meet you in order to find recovery for themselves or a loved one. There's seconds and inches, right? If people didn't show up for me at the time that they did and put me in treatment here at Spectrum at a TC, Lisa, you'd have a different co-host, right? So seconds and inches, and you talked about gratitude, and I think that's so important for anyone listening, regardless if you're listening for yourself or a loved one, or, you just happen to stumble upon this on social media, just the gratitude for the little things in life, right? Rob, I heard you say, take away all the material stuff and I shouldn't be here. And looking at life through that lens and in that way, now I can appreciate the smaller things that maybe I would just glance over, the ability to take that breath we all just took, the freedom to, jump in a motor vehicle and go wherever we want, right? To travel. We talked about traveling all over the place, right? The freedom that we're no longer handicapped or stuck in just one geographical situation where we can go wherever we want, as long as we have a foundation of recovery, and we can find that foundation or help create that foundation wherever we go. So I'm just looking at the time here, Lisa.
The only thing I have got to add, and I think it's a way to wrap it up, is you said, that you shouldn't be here. And I guess I have the exact opposite perspective, right? Like, you are supposed to be here. Yeah. Right? Like you are required to be here, right? Like, you are part of, and you don't even know how many more people you're going to touch, right? And to improve, and to support, like, over the rest of your life. You're supposed to be here, Rob.
I mean, it really is amazing. Like, I have, I'm keep it 100. I have helped a lot of people, right? But the only one that I've gotten clean is myself, right? And at the end of the day, like, you can strip me of everything that I have today. If I can have it in me not to get high, I can have everything back. And like, that's just the mentality. It's take it all, because as long as I don't get high and I don't use, I can build it all back up again. And I think that's really the perseverance and the resiliency of, a recovering addict, to addicts in general, as to, what we can accomplish and what we can get done, and the amazing things that we can do if we work together. So, yeah.
One of the things we wrap up with, which sometimes we forget, so I'm going to try not to forget, is there, and we didn't even give you any warning, so it's fine if you don't have anything prepared, but is there a book or a resource or a podcast that you recommend to folks when you're supporting those, working towards recovery? Anything that you kind of either use yourself or that you would recommend others? We kind of end up keeping like a library of, supports.
I push everybody, all the parents, to Maureen, right? I'm big into therapy. I'm big into the holistic healing. I'm big into all those things, especially, this recovery, journey is a process of evolution, right? Where I was at 30 days clean isn't where I am at, a year clean isn't where I'm at when I'm 6 years clean, right? So the things that I need in my toolbox are much different than the things that I needed in early recovery. I would just say, take all of these suggestions, because they're all free, and the one that you're going to pay for is really the one that you don't take. So,
yeah. Well, I think that was probably a good time to remind our listeners, which we do when this comes up, is that we actually do run Maureen's FAST program at Spectrum. So it's free. It's available to anybody nationally. So it doesn't matter where you're calling from. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. But we have many staff, myself included, who have been trained directly by Maureen Kavanaugh to run the Magnolia FAST family groups. And so we run those on Wednesday nights at 6:00. And anybody that's interested, all they have to do is email magnolia@spectrumhealthsystems.org, and you'll get the Zoom link. So if you've got family members listening, loved ones, and they just need a support group. It's really a wonderful model that takes the lived experience of the family into consideration. And it's really, we're supporting a lot of people that way. So there's always so many connections in this community.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was saying at the beginning, right? I prefaced it by saying, hey, I'm looking at the time, and we still have that resource question in the back of my mind. And Rob, you did a phenomenal job encapsulating everything that you've experienced just in that. I thought we were going to go on for another like half hour.
We still could, right? But we
could, of course,
to our podcast time frame.
Yeah.
You said the word in your intro sentence and in several times in your conversation, Rob, the word grateful. And I just want to say that I'm really grateful that we got this chance to talk today, that we got to meet you and have you on. And this will not be, our last conversation.
Absolutely. There's a lot of work to do. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. I'm very grateful to meet you as well, Rob.
Same.
Thank you so much for sharing your heart for this, your passion, and your story.
Awesome. So folks can follow the podcast if you want to hear more amazing stories. I don't think there's any like Rob's, but if you'd like to hear other unique, amazing stories, and recovery conversations, please follow us on Airing Addiction. Thanks so much, Rob.
Thanks, guys.
Buddy.
Thanks
Bye.
very much.